Sports Trends class, hello, welcome to our Group 4 presentation here in Week 12. We're excited to talk about how much are recycling naming rights worth. That article written by Terry Lefton in the Sports Business Journal. That was the October 17th through 23rd edition. So we're really going to be breaking down today the Denver Broncos Stadium that has Sports Authority Field. The stadium was built in 2001 and is actually, this is the third time the field will change naming rights. So previously, the field was known as Mile High Field. It was also changed to Invesco Field when the new stadium was completed in 2001. Currently, at Sports Authority Field, the seating capacity is 76,125. The original naming rights sold to Invesco in 2001 was sold for $120 million, and before it was changed to Sports Authority Stadium in August of 2011, that deal was actually signed for 25 years for an agreed worth of $6 million per year. So the article breaks down a couple of different things that I want to bring to light. One, trying to find the perceived value of the previous Super Bowl champs, which is what Denver's now trying to seek. Some analysts in the article actually say that they're expecting to get about $10 million a year, which is $4 million more than Sports Authority was paying for it annually. As you all probably know, the Sports Authority brand has now filed for bankruptcy and is going out of business. They recently were bought. But these rights now, Denver is seeking new naming rights for their stadium. So the article, some of the quotes I have here, but the question persists of how much a home field of Super Bowl champion team is worth, specifically one with few non-football events and one seeking its third corporate name since the stadium opened 15 years ago. Brings a couple of interesting perspectives into that thought process, and we're going to talk about some of those here. One of the other people who were quoted in the article, Tony Seller of Paragon Marketing, said if naming rights were solely about impressions and awareness, then they were grossly an insignificant medium. Unless you build a marketing platform to enhance the fan experience and provide them with something meaningful, then naming rights will be a challenge, especially now. You look at all the different ways that companies can market around sports teams. You really have to provide some value as a sports franchise to try to make the naming rights really something of value. So that's where you're going to see we as sports professionals are really going to have to sell that value and help these companies really get the most out of that dollar so that we can continue to charge a premium for the naming rights to these venues. The other article we bring in was the NBC article from 2010 named "Are Naming Rights Deals a Good Buy?" by Darren Rovell. He states that companies have signed naming rights file for bankruptcy are greater than those who don't sign. This prime case in point with Sports Authority. Two things that should be thought about is if it's a good deal for price and for activation. Again, he's pointing out that you can't just slap a name on the actual building itself and think that fans are going to perceive loyalty to your brand just because you name their stadium. You actually have to activate that sponsorship. But he also brings to light that sporting professionals have to sell that value to these companies. And the example that he uses is there's a huge difference in a 30-second ad to having the name of your brand mentioned 30 times in a broadcast. You think about that in terms of the Super Bowl, specifically for AT&T Stadium in Dallas this past year. The 30-second ad that was sold for that Super Bowl was around $3.8 million. So those executives at AT&T can really say, well, that might be worth the value of paying that naming rights deal in Denver or in Dallas, knowing that we're going to be mentioned over and over and over again during that Super Bowl. So, and their brand's going to be shown every time they do a pan of the stadium. Same thing that I think that Arthur Blank was probably pitching to Mercedes-Benz in Atlanta, hoping that they're going to be hosting the Super Bowl in 2018. That Mercedes brand is going to be thrown out there every time, the largest sporting event in the world is shown. So, one of the other things the article breaks down, the Sports Business Journal article, the Miami Dolphins recently reached a deal to rename their home field, and they reached that agreement with the Hard Rock, which is an interesting perspective because the article talks about around 80% of the deals that are done for naming rights are the companies in the same city. So Rob of 21 Marketing says it's going to be interesting to see if that dynamic changes. If brands from outside of major cities will go into those sporting franchises and be willing to name or rename so many of those venues that are coming up for sale. The article breaks down that there's a few of the NFL stadiums that are going through rebranding, including Seattle and Denver, obviously. But there's a lot more of the NBA franchises that are having naming rights for their venues coming up in the next 3 to 4 years. And specifically here locally, the Atlanta Phillips Arena has its naming rights deals that will be negotiated again in the next 3 years. So Premier Partnership is selling naming rights for the Miami Marlins as well, and he cites, again, going back to activating that sponsorship with the right marketing ties to the package, the shift can be natural. It's just changing the name is really limiting for both sides. So again, going back to, you have to activate that name change. There needs to be a marketing plan for the name change, and sometimes those can proceed to be a little gimmicky, but that's really important to the fans. They want to know why their brand is, specifically their home venue is getting a name change. So another article we bring in is the San Francisco Chronicle article from 2016. Are stadium naming rights really worth the money? So the author of this, Joe Grifoli, discusses both J.P. Morgan and Chase Bank wanting to get into the naming rights platform. So both of those two financial institutions are presently trying to jockey for a West Coast naming rights. A couple of them that the article mentions, is not only what's formerly known as Candlestick Park, where the San Francisco Giants and the San Francisco 49ers both play, which should be a pretty easy sell, being both an NFL and a Major League Baseball team playing in that same venue, but also the possibility of the Rams selling the naming rights to their stadium that's on the docket in the near future, as well as the Warriors was also brought up, the NBA franchise, and the power of that brand. So in the article, the key, he said how Chase activates its sponsorships, and most of all, the value that will be local. As a bank, it is a good position to tap into those high network fans who will be able to afford the price bump in tickets with the expensive new venue. Plus, it could be a good position to entertain other corporate sponsors at that venue and acquire their business. I think this is huge for both of these companies, both J.P. Morgan and Chase, because they do try to get business from other major corporations. So having a venue that they can then activate that sponsorship by bringing in potential customers into a venue that has their name on it with such a powerful brand on the West Coast could really benefit both of those corporations. The other article we shared with you guys is the Houston Chronicle article written by David Searles about the 3 benefits for a company paying for naming rights on a stadium. And those 3 benefits he talked about being brand loyalty, brand awareness, fan loyalty, and free advertising. The first 2, the brand awareness, pretty simple. Putting your name on a venue of that magnitude will create plenty of brand awareness, fan loyalty. Again, going back to that activation piece of the sponsorship, you really have to associate your brand at the venue itself by making the fans feel like you're bringing value to their event. And then the last being free advertising, and going back to the commercial versus being mentioned on multiple platforms. Anytime ESPN talks about that game, they're going to mention where it's played at, and the naming rights are included in that mention. So that's more free advertising, and technically you're paying for that. So I differ with him talking about it being free, because it is something that you're paying for on a very large scale. But he also talks about a little bit of the downside. For instance, the Super Bowl in New Orleans a while back, when Mercedes-Benz Superdome blacked out for 30 seconds. That definitely didn't do any favors for that car brand, for Mercedes. But also he talks about the fan apathy, and really in San Francisco, and all the way through the 60s, the 49ers and the Giants played at Candlestick Park, and the name changed in 95 to 3Com Park, and then again to Monster Cable Park in 2004, but the fans still refer to it as Candlestick Park. It's interesting, the newspaper in San Francisco actually refused to call it 3Com Park for almost 2 years after the name change, because they kept referring to it as Candlestick Park, and that was their way of protesting the name change. So those are all things to consider when companies are looking at it. But from a sports professional, we're going to have to know these things. We're going to have to help these companies activate their sponsorships, help build that fan loyalty, and really try to create as much value for that company as possible, so that we can continue to sell these franchise, these naming rights, to really help the sports franchise. Here at Calvary, where I work, Calvary Day School, a K through 12 school here in Savannah, we're currently in the process of selling the naming rights for our field. Our football stadium actually is going to be re-turfed with synthetic turf in the very near future. We're selling the naming rights for $300,000 over 8 years. So that's really been a challenge for me, who I'm solely in charge of raising that funding. In total, it's going to be a $600,000 expense for the school, but they're challenging me to raise that $300,000 through naming rights. And I've pitched it to a couple local medical companies, and trying to get them to understand that we have 171 athletic events a year here on our campus. That go from, we have a Pop Warner team that's associated with the school, that goes from Pop Warner all the way up through the varsity football team, but also soccer. All those athletic events bring in fans. We're averaging about 60,000 fans that walk into our venue every year, and those are all new fans, because all those other teams bring out their own fan base. But also we have a couple of sports camps that we host here on site. So really trying to show that value is what my job has been, and it is very challenging. So all those things are what our group thought about, and we're curious to see what you all think in your discussion question. So thanks. Have a great week.